You know that moment when someone cuts your mic in front of the most important people in your industry? Yeah, that happened to me. My name's Patrick Sullivan, I'm 47, and I've been building digital security systems since before most CEOs knew what a firewall was. Every morning at 6:30, I'd walk into Data Vault Technologies with the same ritual, stop by the break room, pour black coffee into my world's okayest dad mug, a Father's Day gift from my daughter 3 years ago, and head to my corner office on the 15th floor. If you walked past my door, you wouldn't see anything dramatic. Just me sitting behind dual monitors, reviewing authentication logs that would put most people into a coma. I'm the Senior Director of IP Security and Compliance. Sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry, right? The kind of job you mention at neighborhood barbecues just to watch people's eyes glaze over and excuse themselves to grab another beer. But here's what they don't understand. I'm the guy who built the digital foundation that keeps a $2 billion company from crashing into legal hell. Every piece of content we license, every streaming right we control, every digital asset worth protecting. It all flows through security protocols I designed with my own hands. Not some consultant's cookie-cutter solution. Mine. Built from scratch during late nights when my wife was asleep and my kids were doing homework at the kitchen table. 22 years I've been at this. Started when Data Vault was 6 people crammed into a strip mall office next to a dry cleaner. Back when our server room was actually a repurposed supply closet and I was coding authentication systems on a Dell laptop held together with electrical tape and determination. I watched this company grow from startup chaos to corporate powerhouse, and every major security decision came across my desk. The guys who've been here since the beginning, people like Karen Walsh in IT and Sam Rodriguez from Analytics, we had something you can't buy with stock options or motivational seminars. We had that old school pride in building something that actually worked. Karen and I would grab lunch every Tuesday at Murphy's Deli, trading war stories about system crashes we'd survived and laughing at the new hires who thought legacy systems was a dirty word. Remember when we had that power outage in '09 and kept the authentication servers running on car batteries? Karen would say, shaking her head. Try explaining that to someone who learned networking from YouTube. We were craftsmen in a world increasingly run by people who confused PowerPoint presentations with actual work. But that was before Diana Martinez arrived and decided our kind of experience was just expensive overhead. Diana became our new CEO 8 months ago, brought in by a board that thought our previous leader was too risk-averse. The previous guy actually read technical documentation before making decisions. Apparently that was a character flaw in modern corporate America. Diana was 38, Harvard MBA, came from venture capital where she'd specialized in disrupting legacy industries. She wore power suits that probably cost more than my motorcycle and carried herself with that particular brand of confidence that comes from never having to fix something you've broken. First day she addressed the company, standing in our main conference room in a perfectly tailored navy blazer. She talked about streamlining operations and eliminating bottlenecks. When someone asked about maintaining our security standards during rapid expansion, she smiled with all her teeth. "We're going to move fast and break things," she said, like she'd invented the phrase. "That's how you stay competitive." I exchanged a look with Karen across the room. In our world, breaking things meant lawsuits, data breaches, and compliance violations that could shut us down. But Diana wasn't talking to us. She was talking to the younger employees who nodded along like she was revealing the secrets of the universe. The first sign of what was coming happened 3 weeks later. Diana walked into my office without knocking, something the previous CEO had never done, and sat on the edge of my desk, right on top of a stack of compliance documents I'd been reviewing. "So Patrick," she said, getting my title wrong immediately, "you're the systems guy." I looked up from my screen, where I'd been analyzing authentication patterns for our upcoming Project Nexus acquisition. "I'm the Senior Director of IP Security and Strategic Compliance, Diana." Right. Technical stuff." She waved a manicured hand dismissively. "Listen, I've been looking at your departmental budget. Seems like we're spending a lot on what's essentially digital paperwork." I set down my coffee mug carefully. "We're spending money on making sure we own what we think we own, and that we can prove it in court if necessary. But how much of that is really necessary?" Diana leaned forward like she was sharing a conspiracy theory. "I mean, we're buying content libraries, not launching rockets. How complicated can it really be?" That's when I knew we were in trouble. She was looking at intellectual property security, the way someone might look at buying groceries. Pick it up, pay for it, take it home. She had no idea that digital rights were living, breathing entities with expiration dates, territorial restrictions, and more legal landmines than a Cold War battlefield. "Diana," I said, keeping my voice level the way you'd explain electricity to someone holding a screwdriver near an outlet. "Digital rights aren't like physical assets. Every piece of content we acquire comes with dozens of legal attachments: sync rights, territorial limitations, exclusivity clauses, performance royalties. If we don't validate every single one of those attachments, we could end up owning nothing but very expensive lawsuits." She laughed. Actually laughed, a short dismissive sound that told me everything I needed to know about the next few months. "You technical guys always overthink everything. It's content, Patrick. People watch it, we make money. Don't complicate it." That was the opening shot in what would become the shortest war in corporate history. I just didn't know yet that I was going to be the one to end it. We were 8 months deep into Project Nexus when Diana really started showing her colors. This wasn't just any acquisition. It was a $95 million deal to merge 3 mid-sized digital content libraries into one massive streaming platform. The kind of deal that makes or breaks careers, sends stock prices through the roof, and gets written up in industry magazines. The press releases were already drafted. Wall Street analysts were updating their projections. Everyone saw the flashy headlines about revolutionary content aggregation and unprecedented market penetration. What they didn't see was the absolute nightmare lurking in the technical details. I'd been working 12-hour days for months, untangling a legal mess that would make a Supreme Court justice weep. Thousands of fragmented licensing agreements, territorial restrictions written back when people still rented DVDs, sync rights that expired if you looked at them sideways. Every single asset we were buying came with its own unique legal fingerprint, and most of them had poison pill clauses buried so deep you needed archaeological equipment to find them. Karen would stop by my office around 7 p.m. most nights, after the regular staff had gone home, bringing coffee and checking to make sure I hadn't collapsed over my keyboard. "You know, Sullivan," she'd say, leaning against my doorframe, "normal people go home to their families at reasonable hours. Normal people don't have to authenticate 8,500 pieces of content before the quarter ends," I'd reply, not looking up from my screen. "Besides, Sarah's got volleyball practice until 8, and Tom's working late at the garage anyway." My wife understood. 22 years in this industry, she'd learned that acquisition season meant missed dinners, weekend conference calls, and me falling asleep on the couch with technical documentation scattered across my chest. She'd just leave a plate of leftovers in the microwave with a note: "Heat for 90 seconds. Try to eat before midnight. Love you." But Diana saw my dedication differently. To her, it wasn't craftsmanship or thoroughness. It was inefficiency. The first real shot across the bow came during a department heads meeting in early September. I was presenting the security timeline for Nexus, explaining why we needed a minimum of 6 weeks to validate the authentication protocols across all 3 content libraries. "6 weeks?" Diana interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Patrick, we're not building a space shuttle here. We're buying some movies and TV shows." "Diana," I said, clicking to my next slide, "we're not just buying content, we're buying legal obligations. Each library comes with different encryption standards, different territorial agreements, different royalty structures. If we don't validate every single authentication protocol, we could inherit liabilities that cost more than the acquisition itself." She looked around the room at the other department heads, marketing, sales, operations, and rolled her eyes theatrically. "Does everyone else hear this? This is exactly the kind of legacy thinking that's holding us back." Legacy thinking. The phrase hit me like a slap. I'd been building security systems when Diana was still learning basic multiplication, but somehow my experience was a liability. "Let me break this down simply," I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. Library A uses blockchain authentication. Library B still runs on legacy certificate systems. Library C has a hybrid model with territorial encryption keys that reset every 90 days. If we don't properly map and integrate these systems, we could lose authentication control over millions of dollars worth of content. "Or," Diana said, standing up and walking to the whiteboard like she was teaching kindergarten, "we could just accept that some things don't need to be perfect. We move fast, we acquire the assets, we deal with edge cases as they come up. That's called being agile." I watched the other department heads nodding along. These were smart people, but none of them understood the technical complexity of what we were discussing. To them, Diana's approach sounded reasonable, innovative even. The edge cases, I said quietly, could include losing the rights to distribute content we just paid $95 million to acquire. Diana turned back to me, and for just a second, I saw something cold flash across her face. Not confusion or disagreement, calculation. She was already deciding I was a problem that needed to be managed. Patrick, I appreciate your thoroughness, but I need you to understand something. She walked back to her seat, never breaking eye contact. We're not just competing with other content companies anymore. We're competing with Netflix, Amazon, Disney. Those companies move at light speed. They don't spend 6 weeks second-guessing every legal comma. Those companies also have teams of hundreds of lawyers specifically to handle the complications that come from moving too fast, I replied. Which is why we're being smart about this. We're not going to lawyer ourselves to death. Diana sat down, straightened her blazer, and smiled at the room. Patrick, I'm cutting your timeline to 2 weeks. Figure out what's absolutely essential and let the rest go. The room went quiet. Karen, sitting across from me, looked like she'd just witnessed a car accident. Sam Rodriguez, who'd been taking notes, stopped writing entirely. Diana, I can't validate 8,500 authentication protocols in 2 weeks. That's not being agile, that's being reckless. Then don't validate all of them, she said, like she was explaining basic arithmetic. Validate the important ones. Use your judgment. My judgment is that they're all important. Then improve your judgment. That's when I realized Diana wasn't just impatient or uninformed. She was actively hostile to expertise. In her world, experience wasn't an asset. It was an obstacle to the kind of rapid, transformative growth that looked good in investor presentations. After the meeting, I stayed in my office until almost 10 p.m., staring at my authentication timeline. 2 weeks to do 6 weeks of work wasn't just difficult. It was impossible without cutting corners that could destroy the entire acquisition. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the original technical documentation I'd written for our authentication systems, page 247, subsection 12.4. In the event of merger or acquisition, administrative control of the content management system must be manually transferred by the designated technical steward. Failure to complete transfer within 48 hours of closing results in automatic system lockdown to prevent unauthorized distribution. The designated technical steward. That was me. Had been me for 5 years, ever since I'd rebuilt our entire security infrastructure from the ground up. Diana didn't know this clause existed because she'd never read the technical documentation. In her mind, digital rights were just paperwork. Sign here, pay there, collect revenue. She had no idea that every piece of content in our system was protected by security protocols that only I fully understood. I closed the documentation and locked it back in my drawer. If Diana wanted to play fast and loose with $95 million, that was her choice. But she was going to play by my rules, whether she knew it or not. The war was officially on. The erasure didn't happen overnight. It was like watching someone slowly turn down the volume on your professional life until you could barely hear yourself think. Diana was methodical about it, I'll give her that. She understood that you can't just fire someone with 22 years of institutional knowledge without raising red flags with the board. So instead, she decided to make me disappear in plain sight. First came the meeting cuts. The weekly security briefings I'd been running since 2018 suddenly stopped appearing on my calendar. When I asked Diana's assistant, a nervous 24-year-old named Ashley who looked terrified every time someone spoke to her, she gave me a carefully rehearsed response. Oh, Diana feels those meetings should focus on forward-looking strategic initiatives rather than operational details. She said she'd reach out if there are any specific technical questions. Technical questions. That's what she called the security protocols that kept us from being sued into bankruptcy. Then came the organizational restructuring. In the company newsletter, one of those corporate propaganda pieces filled with stock photos of diverse people pointing at laptops, my department was quietly moved from strategic operations to administrative support. Same office, same responsibilities, different box on the org chart. But the message was crystal clear. We weren't strategy anymore. We were overhead. The real knife twist came when Diana hired Marcus Cole as Chief Innovation Officer, a position that didn't exist before but somehow had authority over legacy system optimization. Marcus was 32, MIT graduate, wore expensive sneakers with his business casual outfits, and had the kind of confidence that comes from never having to clean up someone else's mistakes. His first week, Marcus scheduled a meeting with me to assess current technical capabilities and identify optimization opportunities. He showed up to my office with a tablet, an energy drink, and the kind of smile that made me want to check my wallet. "Patrick, right?" he said, even though my nameplate was clearly visible on my desk. "Diana's told me a lot about you. She says you're like the institutional memory around here." Institutional memory. The way he said it made it sound like a medical condition. "I prefer Senior Director of IP Security," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. Marcus perched on the edge of the chair like he was ready to bolt at any moment. "Right, totally. So, I've been looking at your department's processes, and I think there might be some opportunities to leverage automation and AI to streamline your workflows. I'd been doing this job since before Marcus learned to drive, but apparently I needed a 32-year-old to explain efficiency to me. What kind of automation are we talking about?" "Well, for instance, Marcus pulled up something on his tablet, all this manual authentication verification you do. There are machine learning platforms now that can handle that kind of pattern recognition at scale. We could probably reduce your 6-week timeline to 6 hours. I stared at him. "Marcus, you're talking about replacing legal compliance review with an algorithm." "Not replacing," he said quickly, augmenting. "Think of it as giving you superpowers, and when the machine learning algorithm incorrectly validates a licensing agreement and we end up distributing content we don't have rights to." Marcus waved his hand dismissively. "That's what insurance is for, right? We're optimizing for velocity here." That conversation lasted 15 minutes, but it told me everything I needed to know about Diana's long-term plans. She wasn't just cutting my timeline, she was cutting my relevance entirely. But the real gut punch came 2 weeks before the investor showcase. I logged into our shared drive to update some authentication figures for the Project Nexus presentation. My file was gone. In its place was a document titled Nexus Investor Deck Final, Diana, TITTX. I opened it with the sick feeling you get when you know you're about to see something terrible. My 50 slides of detailed security analysis had been replaced by 4 slides. 4 slides covered with stock photos of smiling families watching TV and buzzwords like seamless integration, revolutionary scalability, and frictionless content ecosystem. There was no mention of the authentication protocols, no mention of the territorial restrictions, no mention of the compliance gaps that could cost us millions, and most dangerously, there was a slide claiming we had 100% verified perpetual rights across all acquired digital assets. We absolutely did not have 100% verified rights. We had about 65% conditional rights pending the authentication transfers I hadn't completed yet because Diana had cut my timeline in half. This wasn't just optimism or marketing spin, this was fraud, verifiable, prosecutable fraud. I sat there staring at my screen, listening to the building's air conditioning hum. The smart thing would be to call legal, or the board, or someone with actual authority. But I'd been around corporate politics long enough to know how this would play out. Diana would claim it was a miscommunication. I would be the paranoid technical guy who couldn't see the big picture, and somehow I'd end up being the problem. Instead, I did something that would have made my old Marine drill sergeant proud. I started gathering intelligence. I opened my email and created an auto-forward rule. Every message containing Nexus, authentication, rights, or acquisition got quietly copied to my personal external server. Then I started printing. Not everything. That would be suspicious, just the documents that proved Diana knew about the authentication gaps and chose to misrepresent them anyway. That evening, I drove to Office Max and bought a fireproof safe, the kind people use for important documents and family heirlooms. I installed it in my garage, next to my motorcycle and the workbench, where I'd spent countless weekends rebuilding carburetors and teaching my son about the satisfaction of fixing things with your own hands. Over the next week, that safe filled up with evidence. Printed emails where Diana dismissed security concerns as technical nitpicking, contract addendums showing the authentication gaps she was pretending didn't exist, multiple versions of the investor presentation documenting exactly when and how the lies had been inserted. I felt like a Cold War spy, except instead of nuclear secrets, I was hoarding PDFs about streaming rights and compliance protocols. The strangest part was how normal everything felt. I still showed up to work every morning, still drank my coffee from the world's okayest dad mug, still nodded politely when Diana passed my office. But underneath the routine, I was methodically documenting the construction of a $95 million house of cards. 3 days before the investor showcase, Karen stopped by my office around 6 p.m. She looked tired, stressed in a way I hadn't seen since the server crash of 2019. "Patrick," she said, closing my door behind her, "I need to tell you something, and you didn't hear it from me." I saved my work and turned to face her. "What's going on?" "Diana's been asking IT about your system access levels. Specifically, she wants to know who has administrative control over the authentication database." My blood went cold. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you're the designated technical steward and only you can authorize authentication transfers during an acquisition." Karen sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk. "Patrick, I think she's planning to lock you out." I nodded slowly. It made perfect sense. Diana couldn't eliminate my expertise, but she could eliminate my access to the systems where that expertise mattered. "Thanks for the heads up," I said. Karen studied my face. "You don't seem surprised." "I'm not." "What are you going to do?" I looked at my computer screen, where the authentication control panel was still open. One click could lock down the entire system. Another click could transfer administrative control to someone else. A third option, the one I was seriously considering, would trigger the automatic security protocols I'd built 5 years ago. "I'm going to follow procedure," I said. Karen left, and I sat alone in my office as the sun set over Austin. In 72 hours, Diana would stand in front of some of the most important investors in the tech industry and lie about our capabilities. She would claim we had verified rights to content that could disappear from our platform the moment someone read the fine print. But there was one piece of fine print she'd never bothered to read, the one that gave me the power to turn her $95 million victory into a very expensive lesson about the importance of technical expertise. I was done being erased. The phone call that changed everything came at 7:43 a.m., 2 days before the investor showcase. I was sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee and reading authentication logs on my laptop while my wife got ready for work upstairs. "This is Patrick. Patrick, this is Victoria Kane, lead partner at Apex Capital." I nearly dropped my mug. Apex Capital was putting up $95 million for Project Nexus, the biggest fish in our investor pool. Victoria was a legend in tech financing, known for being brilliant, direct, and absolutely ruthless about due diligence. "Good morning, Victoria. I thought we'd finalized all the technical documentation." "We have," she said, her voice sharp as a scalpel. "But I'm looking at the agenda for Thursday's presentation. Diana's listed as presenting the security assessment section. I don't see your name anywhere." Diana felt a higher-level strategic overview would be more appropriate for this audience. Silence. Then, "Patrick, let me be very clear. We're not investing $95 million in strategic overview. We're investing in a security infrastructure that can protect our assets. I have specific questions about blockchain authentication protocols, territorial encryption standards, and legacy system integration. Diana doesn't know blockchain from a bicycle chain." I smiled for the first time in weeks. "I understand your concerns. I'm calling Diana in exactly 10 minutes. I'm telling her that if my team is flying to Austin, you're presenting the technical section. Non-negotiable. If you're not on that stage answering my questions, we're walking. I'll be ready." "Good. And Patrick? Bring your real analysis, not whatever sanitized version she's been shopping around." 10 minutes later, my office phone rang. Diana's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Patrick, slight change of plans. Apex wants a technical deep dive on the security protocols. They're obsessive about details, so you'll handle that section, maybe 8 to 10 minutes max. Keep it high level, don't get bogged down in technical weeds." "Of course. Should I use the presentation deck you created? The one claiming 100% verified rights?" Her pause lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. "Yes. Stick to the overview, reinforce the confidence, don't create unnecessary complexity. Absolutely. Reinforce the confidence. And Patrick?" Her voice dropped to what she probably thought was a threatening tone. "Don't embarrass me. This is my deal. You're just there to provide technical validation. I understand perfectly. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my garage next to my Bonneville, building a new presentation on my personal laptop. Not flashy, white background, black text, brutal honesty. It was a forensic examination of Diana's lies, slide by slide. Slide 1, actual authentication status. Slide 2, the $30 million liability exposure. Slide 3, the technical steward protocol that could shut down the entire deal. I saved it to a USB drive and clipped it to my keychain, right next to my motorcycle keys. The conference room was on the 32nd floor of the Frost Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Austin. The morning sun streamed in, making everything look deceptively optimistic. Around the polished mahogany table sat the Apex Capital team, Victoria Kane and 3 associates who typed on laptops with surgical precision. On our side, Diana, our CFO, 2 VPs whose exact functions remained mysterious to me, and me at the far end of the table. I wore my best Navy suit and carried a leather portfolio that contained printed copies of every email where Diana had dismissed security concerns as technical overthinking. Diana stood at the front of the room, clicking through her slides with the confidence of someone who'd never had to fix anything they'd broken. "We're looking at a paradigm shift in content acquisition," she said, gesturing at a slide showing a literal rocket ship. "Project Nexus isn't just buying assets, it's building the foundation for total market domination. You're investing in 100% verified perpetual rights across our entire digital ecosystem." Victoria Kane didn't blink. She just tapped her Mont Blanc pen against her legal pad with mechanical precision. "And the technical infrastructure," Victoria interrupted. "The authentication protocols supporting these rights. We've heard concerns about gaps in the verification process." "Concerns?" Diana waved dismissively. "Just competitor noise trying to create doubt. We have complete authentication across all acquired assets. But don't take my word for it." She turned toward me with a practiced smile. "Patrick here can give you the technical validation. Patrick, walk them through our security status." The room pivoted toward me. 12 sets of eyes, representing $95 million in investment capital. I stood up slowly, but I didn't walk to the front of the room. I stayed at my position, hands resting on my closed laptop. "Thank you, Diana." My voice was quiet, but in that acoustically perfect room, it carried like a bell. I think it's important we clarify exactly what complete authentication means in this context. Diana's smile flickered like a fluorescent bulb about to burn out. "The current status," I continued, making eye contact with Victoria, "is as follows. Of the 8,500 digital assets listed in Project Nexus, 3,200 have unresolved authentication protocols. Another 2,100 have territorial encryption restrictions that specifically exclude our target Latin American and Canadian markets." The typing on Apex's side stopped. The silence was so complete I could hear the building's HVAC system. "Furthermore," I said, "the slide claiming 100% verified perpetual rights is factually incorrect. The technical steward protocol requires manual authentication transfer before any rights can be legally transferred. That transfer has not occurred." Diana's face went from confident tan to sick gray. "Patrick, I think you're confusing preliminary data with final verification status. I'm reading from the live authentication database, Diana, the one you can't access because you don't have proper security clearance." "Okay, that's enough." Diana stepped forward, placing herself physically between me and the investors. "I can't allow this technical confusion to continue. Patrick is clearly working from outdated systems. We'll resolve these minor details offline." She looked directly at the AV technician. "Cut his microphone. Now." The kid hesitated for exactly 2 seconds, then reached for the audio console. The subtle electronic hum died. My voice was no longer amplified. "Sit down, Patrick," Diana commanded, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We are finished here." This was the moment. The moment where the troublemaker is supposed to shrink away, embarrassed and defeated. Instead, I slowly closed my laptop. The click echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. I looked at Diana, then at Victoria. I gave a small professional nod. "As you wish," I said, and walked out. I didn't storm or slam doors. I walked past the reception desk to the elevators with the calm dignity of someone who'd just played his ace card. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. The elevator was one of those smart systems that takes forever calculating optimal routes, so I stood in the marble lobby, looking back through the glass walls at the conference room like watching a silent movie. Diana had turned back to her presentation, smile returning, hands spread in amen. Am I right? Gesture. But nobody was looking at her screen. I watched Victoria Kane slowly stand up. She didn't look at Diana, she looked at my empty chair. Even through the soundproof glass, I could see the energy in the room collapse like a controlled demolition. Victoria reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, the real security assessment I'd sent her team weeks earlier. She dropped it onto the mahogany table with enough force that I could see the impact from 50 feet away. Then, one by one, the other Apex representatives started packing their laptops, not checking emails or taking calls, packing up to leave. Diana was gesticulating frantically now, but it was too late. She'd cut the mic on the one person who could have saved her deal. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. As they closed, I caught one final glimpse of Diana standing alone at the front of that conference room, holding a laser pointer that pointed at absolutely nothing. By the time I reached the parking garage, my phone was already buzzing. Text from Karen. Holy hell, what just happened? Diana's having a complete meltdown. I drove home, changed into jeans and a t-shirt, and spent the afternoon rebuilding the carburetor on my Bonneville. My hands stayed steady the whole time. 3 days later, the board fired Diana for material misrepresentation to potential investors. No severance, no stock options, just a cardboard box and a security escort. Victoria Kane called me the following week. Turns out Apex had been planning to poach me all along. They just needed Diana to give them a reason. I'm now Chief Technology Officer at their newest portfolio company, with an equity stake that makes my old salary look like lunch money. Diana's on LinkedIn now, listing herself as an innovation and growth consultant, open to new opportunities. I didn't like the post. She thought cutting my mic would silence me. Instead, she handed me the loudest voice in the industry. Always read the fine print, folks. You never know who wrote it.